Hey there guys, it's Eline, and this time it was husband who drew 3 sets of 5 cards to do the Dark Deck interview. Yes, would you believe it? It's really happening. So in there we have one deck that is the same as in my own Dark Deck interviews, which is the Visconti Sforza. Since I got such a very strong defensive, strategic type reading from the Visconti Sforza in my own session, and because my husband is in the business of accounting, we felt that it would really be appropriate for him to use this deck as well. We were going back and forth a bit about which decks he should use. So we ended up choosing that one, and then the Lord of the Rings tarot, which we have right here. It's a Dutch version with imageries and stories from the book Lord of the Rings. And then the third deck we used is the Sassurabito, the new big cards that we got in the house recently. So I'm kind of hesitating how exactly to go into how much detail I should go with this. It turns out that the reading was really interesting for my husband also, where how are you a dark deck for this Visconti here develops into there being, a lot of choices for him, and it's basically, what do you want? That's what this card is saying. This is, strangely enough, the only card that we all had in common in the whole thing, so far as I've been able to tell anyway, is this is card, which is the Four of Swords again. And the response of the Visconti to that position, so the recommendation for him, which in my case was the Five of Swords, for him the recommendation is the Two of Cups. So there's a different pattern developing here. Even though he has the same card in the dis-ease position, the sense of stagnation, or sort of a, let me think about the word there, an inner sense of frustration or feeling halted in his mind, basically, and not being able to move forward, in his mind. That's what this card refers to. We are fairly confident what this means. For him, the answer to that is friendship, connecting, especially when if he can connect with people online these days, with his poetry activities. That's the answer for him to this sense of stagnation. So, moving onward, we can see a dark aspect in relationships for him is actually generosity, just getting the better of him and just giving too much. And in the case of the career, his dark aspect would be expecting too much friendship, or being naive and over friendly with people in a work context. All this actually makes quite a lot of sense. It's kind of interesting to see how the threads return in the next part of the spread here with the Lord of the Rings deck, where we had a bit more of a difficulty to figure out what this card means here. This is the Four of Cups, which goes into a situation where Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin meet Farmer Maggot. Before they meet him, they are picking mushrooms in the forest, and Farmer Maggot is coming right there in the distance. So the next card is about Theoden having a hard time sort of unhooking himself from Grima, Wormtongue. And as we proceeded, we sort of tracked back again to the first card in order to understand what this means in my husband's case, where it basically has to do with accepting people's generosity. That's there's a strong sense of him not feeling a dark sense of insufficiency always, and that basically, that element sort of worms its way forward, literally, yes, into a sense of disease with, Wormtongue talking to Theoden the whole time, where the answer of this deck to that is to be more like Aragorn, who isn't that easily influenced by anybody else, really. And then we have another dark aspect, and that's actually Lady Goldberry, Tom Bombadil's girlfriend, Mrs., who isn't really a human being. She's the Queen of Cups here. In my husband's case, that's kind of like a dark aspect for him in relationships is often actually the same as here, giving too much. Just basically coming from outer space and wanting to share everything with everybody. And there's a sense of completely losing where the north is in all that, if that makes any sense. And the last card, so where that applies to his career, is actually the phase in the Lord of the Rings story where the travelers try to pass over the mountain of Caradhras, and then they realize that they have to go underneath through the mines of Moria. And I don't know, there's a lot that could be said about this. We concluded just now basically that it has to do with procrastinating in his career, hesitating a lot between. It's as if there's two captains in his life, and there's always, like in this particular instance here, both Aragorn and Gandalf have a different motivation in this moment in the story. So I'm just giving you the cards very quickly to also say what they mean to us at this point, but basically to show, again, a sort of a sequel to this Dark Deck interview, how it really can all tie together, and how very interesting it is to also use different decks for this approach in a manner that's actually rather personal. The Sasura Bito gives us the Hanged Man for How Are You a Dark Deck? And that seems pretty self-evident, really, like it's a much more of a psychological deck. It allows my husband to think of things in a completely different perspective, to look at things from, underneath, as it were. The dis-ease is given as strength, where my husband feels very strongly that it's actually his lack of faith in his own strength that creates the problem for him. The answer to which is a Page of Cups. So going back to an inner child perspective, which ties back in with this Hanged Man here. All this is very much more simple. The relationships card is the Eight of Pentacles, which doesn't surprise me one bit because he's always at work, really. The career card is one way of looking at it would be that you have to wait for things to patch up. You have to be patient sometimes, and that's difficult. Things are healing. Obviously, there's a fracture in the bone here, and it's all tied up, and you just have to be able to wait for things to come together. And in a darker version of this, you would certainly possibly look at impatience as a problem there. So the difference in reading between these three decks is striking, really. Actually, I think that the Sasura Bito and the Visconti both present readings that are fairly straightforward. You know, it's not really simple, but then again, we are not in this business because it's simple. It's just, you always have to think a bit about how does this how exactly can this apply to what we're talking about. But the Lord of the Rings imagery is a completely different story here, and because of the psychological depth of these different people and their different places with respect to each other, with respect to the communities they're from, and all that stuff going on within the story. Yes, Poes. He's just had his dinner. Because of all that complexity, this is actually a sort of a type of darkness that gets, you know, pulled out of the deep, so to speak, which is really very interesting, I think. So I was going to leave it at that. Thank you for watching one more episode of this type of travail. We are quite pleased with what we are doing here on this end. So apparently the Visconti has more compassion for people who are in his line of work than for my type. I'm not so surprised. Thank you for watching once more. See you next time, guys. Bye-bye.